The bully of our school bullied the newbie. He was not human. Some time ago, a new boy arrived at the school. As was the custom with all newcomers, the school bully approached him. He was a skinny boy, with brown-rimmed glasses, somewhat disheveled hair, and loose clothing, the perfect target. Not only for Thomas, the biggest bully in school, but also for everyone else. Thomas stood in front of him, arms folded and a crooked smile on his face. The new boy stared at him for a long moment, saying nothing, until Thomas took his arm in one of his huge hands. "I'll explain how things work around here, new," he said. "You give me part of your money, I protect you." The new boy didn't say anything, just stared at him. By that time, we were all watching the situation closely. Many smiled, complicit, others were scared, some rolled their eyes, knowing how it would all end. No matter how much the new guy refused at first, he would end up giving the bully money. However, to everyone's surprise, the new boy disappeared. Thomas's fingers, which had been holding the boy's skinny arm, were left holding the very air. The bully looked everywhere, not understanding what was happening. "What?" He started to scream, but was interrupted by a loud crack. Immediately afterward, and to the astonishment of the entire school, a metallic contraption appeared around Thomas. It looked like a cage, only one side was not made of bars, but a smooth metal plate. Thomas had been hooked to the metal at the wrists and ankles through metal handcuffs that protruded from the bars opposite the plate. From one of the corners of the apparatus stuck out a gigantic drill, which was pointed directly at Thomas's chest. The bully tried to get free, without any success. Many of us, including me, came to take a closer look at the device. One of the girls screamed, discovering that the new boy's face was etched into the metal plate. His face was very clear, sticking out of the metal, his eyes closed. A new crack startled us all, causing us to walk away. The drill turned on and began to slowly approach Thomas. The sharp point aimed straight into the middle of his chest, into his heart. Thomas began to yell and move more, desperate to get away. Many started laughing, others just stared, and a couple ran outside to call the teachers. I, for my part, began to walk around the device to see how it was set up and if there was any way to turn off the drill. Thomas was a bully. I had been bullied by him for years, but that didn't mean I wanted him to get hurt. Or dead, because if that drill reached his chest, it would kill him, that was for sure. A couple of teachers showed up within a few minutes. Some of the boys began to yell, joining in on Thomas's yelling. "Professor," I said, moving closer to one of them, "I think if we unscrew those things, we can get him out." I pointed out some gigantic screws, metallic like the rest of the structure, that protruded from it and seemed to keep it assembled. The professor looked at me, then looked at the structure and nodded. "I'll get some screwdrivers," he said, and ran off. As we waited, we all watched in horror as the drill moved closer and closer to Thomas's body. The bully was still squirming, and he had started sobbing like a baby. Many guys laughed at this. Most of us, however, were now more concerned than amused. The new boy's face was still there, in the metallic silver, impassive and with his eyes closed, as if he were a punishing god. The drill was already halfway through when the professor arrived with the screwdrivers. I took one. Several more took others. Together we began to try to remove the screws. They were so big and so locked that it took incredible force to move them even an inch. The vibration of the drill and Thomas's crying and struggling were not helping the overall situation. "Thomas," the professor said at one point, "we need you to calm down. We'll get you out of there, don't worry. But please don't move." The bully nodded. Tears streamed down his face and he kept his eyes closed, so he wouldn't look at the drill. The screw that I was removing was halfway. The drill was several inches from Thomas's body, and for a moment I panicked. What would happen if we didn't get it out in time? What explanation would we give? It would be a disaster, that's for sure. Not just for Thomas's family and the school, but for everyone. I couldn't even imagine what it must be like to watch someone get pierced by a screw spinning at full speed. The entire hallway would be drenched in blood and other things I didn't even want to think about. I shook my head, trying to push those thoughts away, and turned my attention back to the screw. I twisted and pulled with all the strength I had, causing the screw to come out a little more. At that moment, one of the teachers managed to remove one of the screws, which fell to the floor with a metallic noise that startled us all. The other teacher was already close to removing another. I was in the middle, and the other boys were in situations similar to mine. But Thomas didn't have that much time. The drill was dangerously close to his body, to his chest. When the second screw fell, both teachers began to help with the others. Thomas's eyes narrowed, and seeing how close he was to death, he gave a desperate squeal and began to move in all directions. "Thomas, calm down," yelled one of the teachers. The third and fourth screws fell to the ground. There were only 2 left. One of them, mine. The teachers went to help, as well as the other boys. The bully's scream filled the hallway. The drill was very close. The 5th screw fell. Thomas was still yelling. The drill seemed to be already touching the leather jacket he was wearing. The professor and I gave the last pull. The 6th and final screw fell to the floor. The metal holding Thomas in place split open and he fell to his knees, shivering. He covered his face with his hands and began to cry again. The teachers went to help him. Almost automatically, I looked at the drill. It had stopped. The teachers helped the bully to his feet and took him away, trying to calm him down. The rest of us stayed and watched the device, which began to vanish into thin air, as mysteriously as it had appeared. No one ever saw the new guy again. Nobody even remembers his name, if he ever said it. The teachers don't know who he was. Apparently, there was no transfer scheduled for that day. Thomas is no longer a bully. Chained school bathroom. The stories I am about to tell have all happened when I was in 8th grade. Our classroom, which has 2 doors, was located at the end of the hallway on the 4th floor. With a suspiciously locked bathroom in front of us, and next to it was one of 2 stairs of the building. Me and classmates would usually see a small kid's shadow running outside the hallway and peeking at the back door of our room. At first, we freaked out but ended up getting used to it. We would even talk to her from time to time, trying our best to make her feel like we're her friends and that she's safe. Back to the suspiciously locked bathroom. We never knew why it was like that, since no teachers would tell us the story behind it. To be specific, the door doesn't have a doorknob because they used heavy chains to keep it shut, but would be opened a few times a month by school staff to be cleaned. Apparently, it's a woman's bathroom. It has pink walls like any other bathroom in the school, but this one has no doors. We would have that heavy feeling whenever we were near it, so no one would really peek through the hole where the knob was supposed to be, or even look inside for too long whenever someone was cleaning it. One day, I and my friend stayed for an hour in our room after class, cleaning it and copying each other's schoolwork before we went to a convenience store to hang out. We finished everything and locked the doors when I decided to joke around, trying to convince my friends to peek through the hole with me. They were hesitant and told me if I saw something, they'd run faster than Usain Bolt, leaving me behind. After a few laughs, I finally got my best friend to peek with me. We counted to 3 and we both saw nothing. I got disappointed and said we should one last time before we went. She said yes, and our other friends stood back, getting serious, obviously having that heavy feeling again. We both peeked again and froze when I saw a woman's feet by the cubicle door. I'm not even kidding when I say I looked at it for a solid 2 seconds before I stepped back and looked at my best friend. I was able to see her serious face that she rarely shows, and I felt shivers down my spine, realizing she saw something too. I let out a nervous laugh and mumbled, "I'm sorry for bothering you." I took my now quiet best friend's hand and slowly walked away from the door. Our friends were scanning our faces, and one of them said they saw nothing, they're just trying to scare us. When we couldn't respond to them, they all peeked through the hole and told us stop messing around, there's nothing there, raising their voices since they thought we were still trying to freak them out. We arrived at the convenience store and my BFF talked about it quietly because we knew our friends wouldn't believe us. We felt our skin crawl when we found out that we both saw a rotting woman's feet. She was wearing shoes similar to us, so I decided to wear my rubber shoes that I wore for PE earlier that day. I will never underestimate or provoke any sketchy places ever again. So a serial killer drove me to school a few times. I have a story for you. It's from when I was in middle school and I missed my bus. My dad was running late and he asked his worker Steven to drop me off at school. And that's how I got a ride to school by a known serial killer. He actually drove me to school 2 times. Stephen Purnell, who killed at least about 4 to 5 women. He killed them in the same van he drove me to school in. Face screaming in fear, it's one of the first times I heard the audible voice of a ghost. I heard a shrill scream out from the darkness of the back of that van, screams out, N.O., when I climbed up in the front seat of the van minibus front seat. I told him that I just heard a woman scream from the back of the van. That I thought someone was back there. Asking him, did you hear a woman scream? And looked at me with these dead side eyes saying nope. He drove off with all of his tools clanging around in the back of that creepy van. I felt like something bad happened back there. I now know those tools clanging around were the same tools that he used to brutally rape and torture these poor women. From what I understand, vice grips and tools were used to kill them. I truly feel like the woman's voice I heard that day that screamed out so loud knew. Her voice still haunts me because her scream was out of concern for me. I'm sure she thought I was going to be another one of his victims, and I was only a young innocent girl 12 years old. Oh, and he worked for my dad's construction company and actually dumped one of the bodies on my dad's construction site. Yeah. Well, anyway, thankfully folded hands, he didn't feel the need to kill me because his usual victims were ladies of the night and I was only just 12 young girls. Not a prostitute. He actually bought me candy at the nearby 7-Eleven near my school. Before he dropped me off at the front doors of my school. But I knew something bad happened in that van. We were all shocked when we found out he was the killer that they were looking for in our area. Never should have missed the bus ever again, but sadly I did. I was always late for school. And that's why my dad asked his worker to drop me off at school. And that's how I got 2 rides from a known serial killer in the same blue van. He brutally raped, tortured, and killed at least 5 women in that same van. I heard a voice come from the back of the van scream out "new" when I climbed in the front seat. The look on that killer's face when I told him I heard a woman scream from back there gave me that creepy side eye. I wonder if he thought this little girl knew something. I did know something was off, but never would have imagined how close I was to pure evil. The torturous things he did to those women with those same tools that I heard clanging around in the back of that van? God, it's the stuff of nightmares. I'll have more stories to cope because after that experience I realized that I can see and hear ghosts and still do. The spirit of that woman from the back of that van tried to warn me not to get in it. She was looking out for me, I believe, and have many more encounters with ghosts who have ended up helping me. Scary AF, but later on I'll realize they were trying to help me. So I will hopefully post that more of you use this one. Weird CCTV experience in a school I teach at. I am a high school teacher in an urbanized province in a Southeast Asian country. I say urbanized because while this city is as modern as can be, cars, televisions, computers, Wi-Fi, all of the comforts that we associate with the modern world, it was still considered a province, in that it is not in a metropolitan area. The school itself is quite urbanized, and that there are CCTV cameras in all classrooms, installed for the safety of students, teachers, and all staff. The classrooms are also fully air-conditioned, which is a plus in my country because we live near the equator. But this quite technologically advanced building is surrounded by trees, long rolling farms, and a creek, things that one might associate with the province. As I said, it was quite an urbanized city. I enjoyed teaching there because while everything is quite modern, the students still retain the quaint politeness and courtesy that develop in kids who are raised in the province. But I am not writing this because of how I enjoyed every day of my stay there. Way back in 2014, I have 2 periods with the 8th grade class in room 314. The first one was at 12:20, the second at 2:40. I was rushing to room 314 where I will be teaching my 12:20 p.m. class, which is after lunch. The stairwell is situated between 305 and 304, so you can imagine the long hallway that I have to rush through to get to my class. I was already 5 minutes late, so the hallways were pretty empty, save for a few students rushing to their rooms. Room 314 is the last classroom in the hallway, and beyond that is a set of stairs used only as an emergency exit. Since students tend to be late for classes after lunch, I have a rule that if I enter the room before them, they will be considered tardy. I reached room 314, entered the room, and started my class. We were having a debate that day, and it was the first time that I got to sit down during this class. I sat down at the back and listened as my students performed. A few minutes later the door opened, and my student, let's call him Kyle, entered the room and smiled bashfully. I jokingly scowled at him and tapped my watch, letting him know he was already late. Of course, I'm not really going to give him a tardy deduction. It's his first warning, anyway. The session went on without incident, and when the time was up, I reminded them of our skit later on for our 240 class. In my country, the students stay in their classrooms with the same classmates, or what we call sections, and the teachers are the ones transferring room per room. Come 240, I was back in room 314, giving my final reminders before we start the skit. When we were about to begin, one of my students, let's call her Erica, told me that their group could not perform because the lead actor was absent. I didn't notice any vacant chairs, I said. Who's absent? Erica replied, Kyle's absent, teacher. I was mildly surprised since I had just seen Kyle earlier. But I just asked Erica, did he need to leave early? Was he sick? Erica answered, no, teacher. He has been absent the whole day. I didn't push the issue. Told them they could present next time. But I was so sure I saw Kyle earlier. So after class, I went to the admin office to ask the security desk if I could watch the CCTV footage from room 314 at 12:20 p.m. The security officer gave me a strange look and clarified if I wanted to see room 314. The reason I'm asking, said the security officer, is that we thought it very strange. Every single feed from all 40-plus rooms in the building is working except for room 314, and around the time you mentioned. That's when I started to feel that maybe something paranormal just happened. My school's walls had names. Ms. Robinson had always been eccentric. You wouldn't notice at first. Her wavy brown hair, gray eyes, and radiant smile usually set people at ease when they saw her, but sooner or later her quirky nature would always give in. Her name is Gertrude, his name is Herbert, and would you please stop flirting with Ruby over there, Samuel? You have a boyfriend. Seem ordinary? It does, doesn't it? Until you realize that Gertrude's the name of the back wall of our classroom, and Herbert is the ceiling. Ruby's our resident lefty, if you're wondering. Not my fault there was only one seat available that day. Most parents would have killed to have her removed. Most parents are idiots. Ms. Robinson was fun, energetic, and one of the best teachers I'd ever had. You'd be hard-pressed to find another teacher with such a passion for their subject as Ms. Robinson, which only further cemented her abilities as a more than competent teacher. Which was one of many reasons I'd always chosen to ignore the less funny facets of her teaching regimen, such as the near-obnoxious amounts of perfume that were constantly being sprayed around the classroom. You couldn't enter the place without at least one tear rolling down your cheeks. When I asked her what it was, she just said that the janitorial staff were testing out new cleaning products. And they couldn't have done it in a classroom that wasn't being used? I asked, strapping my face mask on. Common sense isn't as common as you might expect, she muttered, obviously displeased. You'd think they'd learn the first time. When I turned back to ask her what the hell that meant, ninja disappearing trick. Never gets old until it does. And with Ms. Robinson, it got old fast. Like, this is the 100th time this week, kind of fast. Every time I tried to ask her about the smell or the creepy groans, she just vanished. Oh, I didn't mention the creepy groans. They happened when I was alone, or when the class was actually silent. Sometimes, when we were really bored and the teachers were out, we'd tell them to shut up or groan back. That usually made them quiet down. Or, at least, they used to. Now, I'm not so sure. Now, I think I'm noticing patterns that I never knew of before. Strange patterns. I didn't even notice it at first until one of my friends pointed it out to me. Hey, you haven't seen Annie at school lately, right? Stephanie asked, fiddling nervously. My brows furrowed. I hadn't, actually. Annie and I weren't close or anything like that, but it was weird of her to skip school for 2 weeks straight. Even weirder was the fact that, when we checked, nobody knew what was happening. Apparently, her parents packed up and left in the break or something. We got a new student though. Mark. Ms. Robinson had Marky seated at the far back of the classroom, saying that Annie would like the company. Sometimes I can't believe how stupid I was. Maybe it was the fact that I'd known Ms. Robinson for so long. It felt impossible to me that she might be anything other than good. I kept trying to tell myself it wasn't my fault. I was a child, trying to survive my high school years. But that doesn't stop the memories. It doesn't stop the pain, the guilt, the shame. It doesn't stop me from curling up into a ball every time I remember it, screaming until the sounds fade away and the only thing I hear is my own pitiful sobbing. There's a storage room in my school that nobody goes to. People say it's haunted or something, and that's why everyone, even the janitors, stays far away from it. My friends thought it would be funny if I were to stay back in school. Obviously, I wasn't too pleased with the prospect of spending what could have been a productive/fun night in the hellscape we call our second home, but the $5,000 they threw in helped sweeten the pot. The plan was simple. While everyone else left the school, I'd be hanging back in the storage room until 6 in the morning, at which point I'd head out using my friend's key. Long story that we really don't have time for. My parents were out of town, so it would be fine. Careful. I heard there's ghosts down there, Jack joked, handing me a bottle of water before he left. I downed it in one gulp. The storage room was surprisingly comfy, to be perfectly honest. Sure, a little cold, but nothing like I expected. Best of all was the smell or lack thereof. After spending years being assaulted by ridiculous amounts of perfume, it was a welcome change. I plugged in my earphones and waited to fall asleep, my alarm already set for 6 a.m. It was midnight when I heard the scratching. I tried to ignore it at first. Maybe a cat or something got in? I couldn't do anything about that, so I just tried my best to fall back to sleep. I failed and ended up doing a few stretches when I heard something else. Something darker. Sam? Her voice was distant, and yet so close I could feel her breath on my nape. Annie? I sat there, waiting for a reply. Possibilities rolled through my mind. A prank? Possible, but unlikely. My friends had a 5-mile radius policy set as soon as school ended. Maybe they put some kind of timed recording? I looked around the storage room. The place was Spartan. Nowhere you could hide a recorder. I sighed and turned on my phone flashlight. For a moment the light burned into my retina, and I stood against the wall, dizzy and blind. A few moments passed, and when the spots in my vision began to clear, I felt vertigo hit me like a freight train on steroids. The room had become narrower. Or longer. I wasn't sure, but something was wrong. I staggered forward, and the room twisted again. I kept walking, trying my best to make sense of this strange spatial anomaly. Using my phone as a flashlight, I managed to navigate the corridors. I'd have time to wonder what the hell this was about later. Right now, I needed to find a way out. Samuel. Sammy? Sam. The words kept echoing in the back of my head. I screwed them shut, trying to focus. But it wasn't working. The world kept turning and changing around me. Sometimes I saw hands crawling out of the walls. Sometimes they came from the floor. Some were skeletal, others were made of decaying flesh and blood. What was happening? I must have walked for hours. No, tens of thousands of hours. But the nightmare showed no sign of ending. Would I be trapped here forever? Would I never get to see sunlight again or tell my parents I loved them? I got my answer when the storage room door opened. Samuel? Ms. Robinson asked breathlessly. What do you think you're doing? I couldn't answer. I just fell to the ground, too tired to say anything. When I woke up, the doctor said I'd hallucinated. Apparently, my friends had drugged me with some kind of hallucinogen, and that's what caused my hallucinations. I fainted because I'd spent 3 hours walking in the same room. I'd crashed into the wall at least twice. The water bottle, I realized. The rest of the school year was as normal as ever, except my parents freaked out and grounded me for life. That was years ago. I'm 25 now, and this story had never been of particular importance to me until now. I mean, sure, it's fun to say at parties, hey, did you know I got drugged that one time? And you thought your story about sharks was scary. But now, I don't want to think about it at all. I thought those voices had been hallucinations. I was wrong. A few weeks ago, the school was being renovated for something. One of the workers apparently fainted on the spot when he saw what was behind one of the walls. Kids. Hundreds of kids. Some were nothing more than skeletons now. Others were rotting and decayed. And you want to know the worst part? Some of them were still alive. Those were the most horrifying faces I have ever seen. The chemicals had been the school's way of stopping the smell and infections. Those voices? The kids, trying to cry out for help. The walls were thin enough that they could speak, but judging by the state they were in, even breathing would have been difficult. The police still aren't sure how the hell they did it. Whatever it was designed so that nobody would ever figure it out. Some of the kids weren't even from our town. All of them matched missing case reports from the last 50 years, ranging from our town all the way to, I don't even know. Gertrude Gilbert, Herbert Jennings, Annie Myers. The police have no suspects. No leads. Ms. Robinson is gone, along with the rest of the faculty. I have no idea how this hasn't made national news yet. I'm afraid it never will. Nobody likes to admit when they make mistakes, and trusting Ms. Robinson was our greatest mistake of all. Epic locker stuff bullying experience at school. So my usual gang of no-good-doing scoundrels were wandering the halls of my middle school when we were met with an incredible opportunity. We were headed towards the lunchroom when we saw a freshman asking a senior girl, insanely hot as fuck, on a date. Normally, we would cheer the student on, but this one was different. He was wearing glasses. My friend immediately got involved. Hey, Four Eyes. Fuck you got those goggles on for? Can't see your invisibly small cock again? Said my buddy. The senior girl felt bad and walked away. Now it was just us. We cornered the student into a corner. Hey guys, I was just trying to hang out with that girl. No need to act with such hostility and bitterness. Replied the nerd child. Enough talk, little one. We began throwing punches into the student's face and stomach with astounding force. Each punch knocked the wind out of the kid's chest. After the first barrage of punches, the kid fell to the floor, unable to call for help. My buddy lifted a desk over his head and smashed it down onto the student's face. I picked up a police baton and swung my arm down over his skull over and over again until he fell unconscious. We dragged him into the janitor's room and began to fill a trash bin with sink water. We dropped the student into the full watery trash bin and began rolling him through the hallways, parading our prize for all to see. All students, may this be your example. We shoved the trash bin with the kid inside down a 3-story flight of stairs and watched him tumble down and roll out of the trash. At the end of the day, we received a very stern talking to from the principal, and I assure you we will never take part in such harmful acts again. Crazy kid from my school. This happened 4 years ago, and still, it's scary to think about how lucky I was in this situation. So I was in 9th grade and the year had just started. The day had been going well until my 5th period. I had been assigned a seat by my teacher and sat in it. No more than 5 minutes after sitting in it, another kid walked into class and just stared around the class. He had a black beanie on and I could see his long black hair sticking out. He was wearing a really dirty camo jacket and had some ripped apart jeans. He stared around the class for about 30 seconds until he locked his eyes on the seat next to me. He stared at the seat for a good 10 seconds and started to slowly move towards it and throw his stuff down under the chair. He sat down and then I went on my phone. When the teacher called our attention, I noticed at the corner of my eye this kid staring at me. I looked at him and he looked away right when I did. Now keep in mind this was in 9th grade and I was a bit of an asshole back then. I guess it's what I get, but as soon as he did that I asked him if we had a problem. He stared blankly ahead for about 5 seconds before slowly turning his head and muttering a soft and raspy no. He then turned his head to focus on the teacher and I did the same. The whole class, I noticed him occasionally staring at me for about 10 seconds before turning back. The class ended and I went to my other classes before heading to the bus and going home. After that day, I didn't see that kid for a while, but about a month or so later, he showed up again and sat right next to me. The teacher called him up to her desk and he slowly got up and looked directly at me before going up there. He talked to the teacher for a bit and I could hear them arguing about something. Eventually, he came back and sat next to me again. Later in the class, I asked to use the bathroom. I got the bathroom and decided to hit the nicotine I brought to school. While I was in the stall, I heard somebody walk in, so I quickly put it away and pretended to be using the bathroom. It was silent for a long time, so I decided to fake flush the toilet and walk out, but as soon as I opened the stall, I got pushed back in and hit me in the face. Immediately, I got super mad and pushed the door back and heard someone hit the wall. I opened the stall all the way and saw that same kid. I asked him what his problem was and he got up and rushed me. I hit him directly in the face and soon we started fighting in the bathroom. I was able to beat him and left him with a bloody nose in the bathroom. I went back to class and 10 minutes later so did he. The teacher asked what happened and the kid snitched on me. I got even more mad and was ready to fight again, but the teacher told me to go up to the office. I got suspended and my mom picked me up. That isn't the end though, it gets much worse. After a day or two of being suspended, my parents didn't care because it was self-defense. I told them what the kid did and my dad was proud of me for teaching him a lesson. I was home alone one night because my dad and mom had gone out for a date. It was a little past 11 when I heard a knock at my door. It was super late, so I looked through the peephole to see nobody there. I thought somebody was just playing a prank, so I went back to my room, but as soon as I was about to lay back in my bed, I heard the doorbell ring this time. This time I was ready to go out and cuss somebody out. But again, nobody was outside when I looked through the peephole. I waited this time while looking through the peephole, and after about a minute I saw a hooded figure walk up to my door and ring the doorbell, then run back to the street and stand across the street to watch. I started to think it was a robber trying to lure me out, so I decided to go into my dad's room and get his Glock 45. I loaded it and decided to sneak around the back of my house with it and scare somebody. I was as quiet as possible and saw the figure walking up to my door. I cocked the gun, and in the darkness, I said, "What do you want?" I turned the laser beam on to let them know I had a firearm ready. They sat there with their back turned for about 5 seconds before turning around. He didn't say anything and instead was silent. I told him to get the fuck off my property, and he turned to the street and started walking. I waited until he was for sure gone while keeping the gun handy at all times. I went back inside my house and I didn't hear anything for the next hour. Then around 12:30 a.m., I heard my back gate open. It had no lock on it, so anyone could have just walked in. I went to my parents' room, grabbed the gun again, and waited by the back door. The back door had blinds, so nobody could see out or in unless you moved them. I heard somebody walking around the backyard, and I was ready to fire. Just then somebody tried to open the back door, but it was locked. I knew somebody was trying to break in, so I took the gun off safety. The person tried it about 3 times before walking back to the gate and opening it again. I was not playing around anymore, and I decided to call the police. While on the phone with the police, I heard my back door shatter. Just then I saw somebody walk in and stare at me. I aimed my gun while dropping my phone and yelled at them to leave or they'll be hurt. Just then the person pulled out something fast and started running at me. I didn't hesitate and shot a bullet at them. I heard them scream in pain, and it sounded like a voice I heard before I turned on the kitchen light, and I saw him. The same kid whom I had fought. On the ground, I saw a large kitchen knife. I then wanted to know how he got my address, so I yelled at him to tell me how he found me, otherwise I'd shoot again. He then spoke only one sentence, and that was, "If you want them gone, you make them gone." I then punched him as hard as I could in the face, and he got knocked out. The police arrived shortly after and had taken him in handcuffs. I was relieved after the police and I had talked, and they took him away. I called my parents and told them everything, and they rushed home. My mom cried in my arms, while my dad was so proud and surprised I was able to handle such a scary situation so well. After that night, I went back to school after a week. I got into my first class, and one of my friends asked me about it. I told him everything, and what my friend said filled me with fear and made me think how lucky I was. My friend told me that on the news he had seen that the kid was found to have murdered both his parents and 3 other kids in the school that night. He was out for blood, and I was supposed to be his next target. Whatever you do, always have a weapon in your house, because you never know what kind of person could be looking at you and thinking, "You're next." High school stalker. I'm 27 now, so this was about 12 years ago. Me and my cousin, whom I will call Jay, were walking in Monaco Park. It has a sidewalk that you can walk around, about the size of 2 tracks. I used to live right across the street from the park at the time, and my cousin was about 3 blocks from the park. She lived on the opposite side of the street, so she attended a different school than me. It was probably around 4 or 5 p.m. that evening. We were just doing our normal catching up, talking about crushes, school, and just all around life. We get downhill and we see this guy, who was probably around 20 to 21 years old. He has a puppy. So being the animal lover that I am, I ask him if I can pet his puppy. Yeah, not the smartest idea. So I pet the pup and we head on our way. This guy then gets up and stays about 100 feet behind us. We didn't think much of it. Being that he had a puppy with him, we thought he was just on a stroll. Me and my cousin do a couple of laps around the park with that man falling not too far behind us. It gets to be around 7 p.m. and it's time to go home. So we part ways and head to our houses. Fast forward to around 11:30 p.m. I hear the rocks moving around outside my window, so I pull the blinds back and take a peek. There is no one in sight. So I decide to lay back down to fall back asleep, and once again, I hear the rocks outside my bedroom window. Again, no one or anything on sight. Now I'm nervous, but don't see anything. Back to bed I go. It gets to be around 3 a.m. and again the rocks are shuffling outside my window. This time I decide I'm not going to go look. I'm just going to stand by the window to see if I hear it again. I did. About 15 minutes had passed and I heard the footsteps again. This time I hurry and open my blinds to see what it was that was in the rocks. It was that man from the park. He ran quickly as soon as he saw me. I'm scared at this point to even go back to sleep. Tomorrow rolls in and I've got school. I wake up, get ready for the day, and head off to school. Being at school with no sleep was very hard. The end of the day comes and it's time to go home. I always stopped at the library before going home, that way I always had something to read. While I was at the library, I began to see that someone had started to follow me through the aisles. He is watching me through the bookcase and following my every step. No matter where I went, I could see him watching me through the bookshelves. I decide I'm just going to keep acting casual as if I don't see him. Man, this is so creepy. At this point, I'm a little nervous to walk back home, but I figured it was daylight and he wouldn't have the balls to try to do anything during the day. So I began to head home instead of checking a book out that day. This asshole begins to follow me outside. I pick up my pace just to get a good head start, and before I know it, he grabs my arm and spins me around to face him. I freak the fuck out and begin to push him away from me. At this point, adults were starting to come outside to see what was happening. The guy starts to say I'm his girlfriend and he is trying to take me home. I am officially freaked out at this point. I began to cry out of fear that I wouldn't get any help, so I started to scream that I didn't know who he was. This older man, probably in his 30s, came over and told him if I wasn't his girlfriend and didn't know who he was, that he needed to leave me alone. This guy continues to say I'm his girlfriend and I needed to go home with him. The older man didn't believe a word this guy was saying, and I could tell he was so tired of watching this man pull me around. He clocks back his fist and punches the guy in his face, a good one. At that point, he let me go. I began to run as fast as I could to get home. I never once got to thank that older man for pretty much saving my life that day. So to the man who stood up for me, thank you so much. A creepy guy followed me home from school. So this is quite short, and it was 4 years ago, so the details might be a bit blurry, so here goes. When I was 9 years old, I was walking home from school in a lonely street, with no people in sight, few houses, and woods near the pavement/sidewalk. I wasn't bothered, however, since I had taken this route home many times before and nothing has ever happened to me despite the occasional shady feeling I got walking there. Halfway walking down, I noticed a quick pace of steps behind me, so I glanced back and saw a man who looked about in his 20s, about 5 feet 9 inches, and had dark curly brown hair, piercing green eyes, and a lot of piercings on his face, literally everywhere, and an extremely pale skin tone. He honestly looked dead. He gave a quick smile at me, and of course, being brought up to be polite to anyone despite appearance, I waved and smiled back and thought nothing of it. A couple of minutes passed and this guy was still walking behind me, which again little 9-year-old me took no notice of and continued walking to the end of the street and then crossed over the road. This guy does the same, with a slightly quicker pace behind me, like a quick walk sort of pace. I was starting to get a little creeped out since there were no houses around this street, just the woods on the other side of the pavement. There was a pub and a post office, but nothing else. A few cars drove up and down the road, but that's about it. Just me and this guy in a shady-looking street. Suddenly, I could sense this guy behind me, like probably a foot away from me, so I decided to pick up my pace a bit as well. By the way, I couldn't stop off at the post office because it was closed and the pub wouldn't let anyone under the age of 15 in without an adult. Then I hear a car honk behind me, and it turns out to be my grandma to pick me up since I was meant to be staying the night down her house, and my mom forgot to tell me before I left for school earlier that morning. My grandma said she knew this is the way I took and drove as quick as she could to see if I was still walking, and I hopped in. I didn't tell her about the creepy guy until later, and when I looked back out the window, the guy was walking back the way we came. When I told my grandma what happened, she called the police. They came and asked for details, but couldn't find him, and I never saw the guy again, and I wasn't allowed to walk home from school on my own for some time due to the fear of this guy still being out there, and probably is to this day. I'm just grateful that my grandma showed up in time, because who knows what this guy would have done. I mean, it isn't that hard for anyone out on that street to take anyone and drag them into that forest, / anyway, this is my first Reddit post and it probably won't get noticed, but hey, whoever does Reddit, I hope you find this story creepily interesting, and thanks. Until next time, see you later. My school just went on lockdown. The school shooter sure as hell isn't human. 10th grade can be a bust. But going on a full-out lockdown can't be compared to all the other shit you might face, especially the lockdown I was in a few years ago. On that one Wednesday afternoon, during English class, the loudspeakers came on, and the vice principal's panicked voice flooded the room. Lockdown, 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 lockdown. Usually, we can tell if a lockdown is a real deal because, in a drill, the vice principal or the principal says lockdown 3 times. But when a lockdown is real, and when someone dangerous and armed is in the building, the vice principal says lockdown 4 times. The lockdown was going smoothly at first until we realized something. A girl, Linda, was in the washroom, and she hadn't gone back for 10 minutes since the lockdown started. Our 7-foot-tall, 300-pound English teacher bravely volunteered to go check if everything was okay. Honestly, I don't think a bullet could even pierce his skin enough to reach his vital organs. When the teacher hadn't returned in 20 minutes, We started to panic. What the hell is going on? They should be fucking back. One kid said. They're probably dead. The fuck? When is this over? Everybody shut the fuck up. We wait 10 minutes until Mr. Johnson comes back, and if they don't come back, we dash. Somebody screamed in the hallway. A female voice. One of my best friends, nicknamed Blame, pulled me aside from the chaos. Blame was allegedly part of a gang. He dressed in hood clothes, always carried a switchblade on him, and never spoke in full sentences. Yo dog, shit's going on? Blame asked. I replied, I don't know. Why the fuck isn't Mr. Johnson coming back? Someone is outside, and by the looks of it, they're armed. Another scream echoed into the hallway. Linda ran down the hallway, like that cliche girl in every slasher film, and she started banging on the door. Let me in, she screamed. Yo girl, calm down, Blame said. Calm down, stop fucking around. What's going on? I asked. Let me in, something is chasing me. This isn't funny, Linda, Dan said. Dan slowly removed the barricade, unlocked the door, and he stepped out. Through the window in the door, I could see him asking Linda something when something we couldn't see tripped Linda and dragged her, screaming. Fuck! Dan screamed. He desperately tried to run back to the door, but the thing we couldn't see grabbed him and started dragging him along the floor. He kicked, screamed, and punched, but whatever had a hold of him was stronger. The two freshmen were dragged to the other hallway, where we couldn't see them anymore. The screams eventually cut off. I rushed to the door, locked it, and I covered the window. The fuck is going on, dog? Blame screamed. I'm not paid enough for this shit, I said. All the kids began to panic, and arguments ensued. 3 kids, Dan's goons, wanted to go out and try to look for him. I tried to argue, saying that it was too dangerous. I almost feel bad for what happened to them. Ryan, one of them, yelled, "So you're going to just sit here instead of looking for my man?" Hey, I don't know if you numbskulls can process thoughts anymore, but did you see what took him? That's no school shooter. Hell, it might not even be human. And you want to get out and look for a dead man? Ryan stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. What was that, bitch? Blame stepped between us and glared at Ryan. Dog, get the fuck away from my homie, or I'ma fuck your pansy ass up and make you wish you were never born. Ryan looked like he had an idea. You. Give me that switchblade you always carry. In case you didn't know, even on school grounds, Blame always carried a switchblade in his pocket in case, as he said, shit went down. Hell nah, bitch, you go get your own, dog. I decided that I had enough of this shit. You know what? Ryan, if you want to go outside and look for your dead friend, be my guest. No one's stopping you. Go out and fucking die. Just know that I warned you. Ryan looked hesitant. Fine. Let's go. He looked at the silent group of sophomores, at his jocks. When they didn't come, Ryan screamed, "Let's go, you pussies." And they went outside, into the dark hallways. I watched as Ryan and his gang went into the hallway where I couldn't see them anymore, which was also the hallway where we saw Dan and Linda disappear. I heard their footsteps abruptly stop. I heard one of them yell, "What the fuck is that thing?" followed by very deep and aggressive growling, and the sound of something heavy standing up. "Oh shit, let's get out of here." Ryan screamed. Go, go, go dash! All the screaming and sounds abruptly cut off, like someone had turned the mute button on. Then I heard deep and loud footsteps, then the sound of something large being dragged down the hallway, heading away from us. My stomach twisted. I knew this was going to happen. Everyone started to panic, a few kids started to cry, and some kids made futile attempts at calling 911, which wasn't working. What the fuck was that? I stood up. They're probably dead and fucked, and nothing's going to change that. Now we have 20? Sorry, I'm not too good at subtraction. Yeah, we have 20 people left. We need to at all costs avoid panicking because that'll who the fuck put you in charge? One kid asked. I did, dog. Blaine said. Now shut the fuck up and listen. Thanks, man, I said to Blaine. Anytime, player. Now does anyone have weapons? I asked. 7 kids, including me, raised their hands. Of course. Half the fucking class was part of a gang. And we were in the USA. In the end, we had gathered 10 weapons from all the kids. Mostly switchblades, Swiss Army knives, folding knives, and even a few fixed blades. I had a small folding knife my father had given me. Blaine pulled me aside. Yo dog, I got something to tell you, he said. What? I asked. I'll tell you when you drop the fucking attitude, he yelled. I have a gun, I raised my eyebrows. Are you serious? I asked. Yeah, dog, Blaine pulled up his hoodie, revealing a 9mm pistol sloppily holstered in his belt. That's great. How much ammo do you have? I asked. 2 magazines, he replied. I stood up. I have an announcement to make. Everyone went silent. We have a fucking gun, the class cheered. I walked to the other side of the classroom. In case you were wondering, we don't have windows in our classroom since we're at the heart of the school, and even if we did, we were on the 3rd floor anyway. Now, did anyone call the police? I asked. Nah, they keep hanging up on us, one kid said. Of course, they did. I pulled out my phone and typed down everything that had happened on Reddit, so I could post it later or something. Should we get OU dash? My heart dropped as something huge bashed against the door. Everyone screamed and backed away. Oh shit dog, Blaine said. He turned the safety on his pistol. No, I put my hand gently on his pistol. Save the ammo for later. I'm going to get a good look at this thing. Upon not hearing any noises, I walked to the door and took the cover off the window. I looked out the hallway and got a long, good look at the thing that had killed 5 of our classmates. There was a damn monster right outside our classroom. The guy from school. It was my first day of school. My mom had woken me up. I was not happy because we moved to a new house far away from my old house, and this was my very first day of school. Of course, I had to go to school. Once I arrived, I was greeted by a very seemingly friendly guy. He told me he was my age and that he was in my class. Apparently, he was told to give me a tour. During the tour, I felt super uncomfortable because he kept staring at me every time we started walking for him to show me a new part of the school, and after the tour, he didn't even ask me if I had any questions. He just grabbed my hand, which also made me super uncomfortable, and told me we needed to head to class. We arrived at class and I met my teacher. She was a really kind teacher. She told me I could sit wherever I wanted, so I sat down in an empty seat in front of the class. The creepy guy tried sitting next to me, but the teacher told him to sit in his proper seat. He did, so I was paying attention to the lesson, so I hadn't noticed that he'd been staring at me until I turned around for whatever reason and saw him just staring at me. Once he saw me turn around, he did too. I tried to avoid the guy ever since then, but he wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I was alone, he'd somehow know and come over to talk to me. Being the friendly person I am, I always talked back to him and answered his weird questions like, "Do you still sleep with teddy bears?" Or "What are you passionate about?" I know that doesn't seem that weird. It isn't the questions that threw me off. It's him already knowing the answers to these questions, but him still asking them anyway. I was at home for a bit since I got really sick, and my phone had been spammed with weird messages that read, "Get better soon," or "Are you feeling better yet?" I immediately knew that the creepy guy from school, who wouldn't leave me alone, had somehow found out what the number was. I replied asking who this was. And not to my surprise, it was the creep from school. I blocked him because I really wanted him to leave me alone. I fell asleep because of how sick and tired I was, but I woke up by a loud bang coming from my living room downstairs. I knew my mom couldn't be back yet since she was on a business trip, so I went downstairs still half asleep. Of course, there he was, the dude from school. He found out my address. I screamed in his face, making my headache worse. I ran out my front door towards my neighbor's house. I aggressively knocked on the door. I was so scared. I saw him leaning out my front door. I knocked louder on the door. When I saw him walking towards me, I saw my neighbor at the window and screamed for them to help me. As he got even closer, they quickly opened the door, slammed it shut, and locked it. Then is when I asked to use their phone to call my mom, then call the cops. The guy from school was banging on my neighbor's door, yelling my name and saying it was a misunderstanding and that he was just coming to bring me a better gift. I knew that wasn't the case since I had just blocked him, and he decided to come to my house and chase after me to my neighbor's house. When the cops got there, they found him trying to break into my neighbor's back door. My mom cut her business trip short and he was arrested, but since this was his first offense and we were just in 10th grade, he only got a few months in prison. My school lockdown experience. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it happened years ago. Scary experiences always have a way of sticking with you, etching themselves into your brain until you can recall every minute detail with crystal clarity. That's certainly the case with this particular incident. It was a normal day at school. I was in my math class, listening to the teacher drone on about quadratic equations. I remember feeling bored and wishing I could be anywhere else. My wish would soon be granted, but not in the way I wanted. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life. I still remember the sound, the staticky buzz that filled the room and made everyone jump. The principal's voice came through, steady and calm, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "This is a lockdown," he said. "I repeat, this is a lockdown. All students and faculty are to remain in their classrooms until further notice. This is not a drill." My classmates and I exchanged worried glances. Lockdowns weren't uncommon at our school. We'd had a few in the past due to drug busts or suspected gang activity. But something in the principal's voice made us all feel uneasy. This was different. I won't bore you with the details of the initial lockdown. It was standard procedures. The teacher locked the door, we turned off the lights, and we all huddled in the corner. I remember how quiet it was, how still. All we could hear was our own breathing, the clock ticking on the wall. We waited. The principal finally came on the intercom and said the lockdown was over, so we went out of the classroom to the different classes we were supposed to go to. So after a while in my history class, I had to use the bathroom, so I raised my hand and asked to use the bathroom, and the teacher let me, so I was on my way to the bathroom. I didn't realize anything was amiss until I heard shouting from down the hall. At first, I thought it was just some kind of argument. But as I got closer, I could hear the fear in the voices. They were screaming, begging for help. And then I saw him. The man was tall, with shaggy hair and wild eyes. He was dressed in all black, which made him seem even more menacing. He was holding a gun, I don't know what kind. I'm not a gun guy, and waving it around like it was a toy. I remember my heart pounding in my chest, and the way my palms got slick with sweat. I froze. I don't know why he noticed me. I was just a kid, small and unremarkable. Maybe I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he turned towards me, training his gun on my chest, and I felt like my legs were made of lead. I couldn't move. "Get over here," he growled. Now, I didn't have a choice. I stumbled towards him, my hands raised in surrender. He grabbed my arm and yanked me close. I could smell the sweat on his skin, the gunpowder in the air. "Listen," he said, and his voice was surprisingly calm. "I'm not going to hurt you, but you're going to help me get out of here. Got it?" I nodded, my throat dry. I remember wondering where the hell the police were, and why they weren't here to save us. I remember thinking that this was it, I was going to die, but it wasn't that simple. The man dragged me down the hall, through a stairwell, and into a dimly lit basement. There were other people down there as hostages, all of them scared and crying. He shoved me towards them and barked out orders. "Sit down. Shut up. Don't move." I did as I was told, huddling with the others in a corner. I don't think we spoke, we were too terrified. All we could do was listen as the man paced back and forth, muttering to himself. I heard him talking about a plan, about how he was going to get away. I don't remember the specifics, I was too busy trying to keep my breathing steady, trying not to hyperventilate, and then, suddenly, it was over. We heard shouting and the sound of running footsteps. The man swore and raised his gun. "Stay back," he warned. But it was too late. The police burst in, shouting orders. I remember a flash of movement, the sound of a gun being fired. And then the man was on the ground, surrounded by officers. It was over. I don't remember much after that. I think an ambulance came and took us all away. I remember seeing news cameras and journalists, and the way the lights glared in my eyes. I remember being told I was lucky, that I'd survived. But it didn't feel lucky. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from years later. I still think about that day. I wonder what would have happened if I'd been a few minutes earlier or later, if I'd never needed to pee. I wonder what would have happened if the man had been more violent, more unhinged. I wonder how many other people have gone through something like this, and how many more will in the future, but mostly, I'm just grateful to be alive.